I had a colleague at the University of Arizona of blessed memory, Marcel Newts, one of our most prominent mathematicians. And Marcel and I had a discussion one day. He said, you know, I know that what you guys do, meaning you composers, is infinitely more complex than anything that I have to deal with. I have an order, I have a certain way of working all the time. You guys have to make thousands of decisions at every moment of creation. There's my connection to mathematics. Okay, there you go, you have it. I'm going to start off by playing you a piece in its entirety. Don't worry, it's only about 5 minutes long. But it seems to me that at an event like this, it's worth it for us to have a complete aesthetic experience. What you didn't hear is that Aaron Mobley was my student, so I'm very proud that he gave such a wonderful presentation. And you heard various parts of various pieces. So I'm going to play you a piece called Gateways. It's a fanfare. So let me ask you, the audience, what is a fanfare? What would you expect to hear? I'm sorry? Fireworks. Okay, so that's an analogy in another area, some kind of fireworks. Anybody else? Any other musical terms? Trumpets. So you associate certain instruments with a fanfare. Anything else? Any rhythms? Anybody want to sing me a rhythm that you might hear? What would those trumpets be playing? Would they be going da 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 dee da da dee da da dee? What would they be doing? Marshall. Oh, Marshall. So something yup da up da up da up or dum da dum or something like that. Okay. So what would the emotive feeling be of this? What kind of empathy would you probably be drawn into? I'm sorry? Celebration. That tells us the event, but it doesn't exactly explicate the emotion, but some sort of celebratory emotions. I assume that means joy and not angst. So if we want to correlate it to a specific emotive state, okay, all of that is true. So a brief introduction to the piece. This was commissioned by the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra as part of their semi-sesquicentennial celebration. It was 50 years after Copland when they did the same thing, when Copland wrote the fanfare for the common man. So this has some historical significance. Somebody said Marshall, somebody said trumpets. My guess is also that you associate that with some sort of historical memory. Because in fact, when would they have created fanfares that used trumpets? Probably when you were bringing a king to town, or some other person who existed high up in the hierarchy of the aristocracy of some sort. So it has a historical connection. What else might it have? This is a little different. This is after the Stravinsky piece that you just heard. It's a bit of a collage, not something that really happened until the 20th century. So what also happened in the pieces that you heard is we heard from Gregorian chant to Bach to Brahms. And I'll get to this more in my literal talk that's written out. You heard some sort of progress of language. We went from what we call monophony, from one voice to a couple of voices, to actually 3-note chords in the Brahms, didn't we? Okay, this is something that we're going to talk about in terms of arts in Western civilization. This does not happen in other civilizations. We don't talk about the progress of language much in other civilizations. So it's a collage piece, which means in this case, it presents you with a number of different emotional possibilities within one piece. Western civilization. Does that happen in other cultures? Do we have different emotive states in confrontation with each other or in a dramatic relationship with each other? We've talked about Greek dramas, other sorts of drama. Is this something that is implicit, in fact, in music and other art forms of the West and generally not found in other cultures? I would argue that that's the case. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you to listen to this piece. Just a few landmarks. It starts with the fanfare theme. It will have other materials of a somewhat rambunctious nature. It will also have other themes that are much more internal, much more incantatory. pondering, questioning. There'll be a second statement of the opening theme, but it's presented in a different guise. Oh, somehow in Western civilization we recognize that different ideas can actually hold different emotive content. And then finally, at the very end, it will come back in the mode that Dr. Wood just suggested as a celebratory theme as we get to the end of this journey. Oh, we're on a journey. Is that something which is also inherent in Western civilization because of our understanding of time from the Jewish Bible, that we actually exist in history? We don't go in circles, but we are on a pathway going someplace. So there you have it. I'm going to ask you to, your thought experiment, try, all of you. This will be embarrassing for some of you, but close your eyes while you listen. And ask yourself simply the following question, for those of you who don't listen to music much. When you hear something that's changed, is it new, different, or something similar that you've heard before? And this comes at you in quick cuts of material, by the way, a la some of the Stravinsky that you just heard. It's very definitely part of our 20th century experience. Second pillar. Where does it start? Okay, so music comes out of silence and moves back into silence. Why is that? Why do we do that in our concert halls? Other people do not. So any discussion of the state of music in Western civilization or American culture by extension must first start with a definition of the term itself. This is, of course, similar to that problem with the term art. Only 150 years ago, both terms had commonly understood meanings which required no further discussion. The situation changed once and for all with the advent of modernism, then postmodernism, and with the parabolic rate of change in the 20th and 21st centuries. We might not wish to talk about music, but rather use the plural form musics. We must describe and confront the issue of both the hierarchical and the longitudinal, which is to say we must confront both the issue of music as it is found around the flattened world, and music as we might describe it from high or low, high to low, or from popular to classical, or entertainment to art. We must distinguish with some clarity the very broad landscape of musics. It did not used to be this complicated. In certain sectors, one might suggest academia, the press, and among the elites, there were certain priorities which pertained. In America, art and classical music, which meant music of European extraction or provenance, was favored by the elite. At the same time, it lived amidst the culture of American folk music, and that found in churches. The arrival of various immigrant groups, particularly the Italians, brought their popular art culture of opera to these shores with a vengeance. Nonetheless, there was an agreed-upon center. As Terry Teachout has noted, America is now, and maybe was, a place primarily of popular culture. From Tin Pan Alley to Hollywood to radio to television, popular culture drives and has driven the car. But there was also a middlebrow time wherein art culture was at least in the game to capture America's heart. The time of the NBC Orchestra and the Omnibus series of Leonard Bernstein. In other words, high music was taken seriously and was part of the cultural conversation. Its ambition to aim higher than popular music was recognized for its merit. It involved a recognition that those works which we call masterpieces are called that because, as Terry says, they really are better. Western art music has, like the larger culture, drawn from other cultures. The influence of the Turks is found in the music of Mozart and Beethoven. Closer to our time, one can mention the influence of the gamelan on the music of Debussy, who heard that music at the World's Fair of 1896, or the influence in Bartok's and Kodaya's music from their study of Hungarian folk music, or American folk music on the music of Aaron Copland, or in our time, the influence of African drumming on the music of Steve Reich, or of Indian music on that of Philip Glass. This flattening of the musical landscape, both in time and space, also goes back to the arrival of world music in the 70s in popular culture with the influence of music of Africa and reggae, among others. This sub-history is part of the breakout of black music, most notably jazz, blues, and rhythm and blues, into the mainstream of popular culture in the 50s and 60s. The musical polymath Gunther Schuller only made the distinction between commercial music and other music. He stated, "I don't care what category music belongs to. I only care whether it is good or bad." He says that a creative artist must call in all those musical experiences in his life that have true meaning, and that they all must come to play in his musical creations. Schuller also thinks that all classical and vernacular musics are worthy of our support and interest. All musics are created equal, and it is, quote, is a global concept which allows the world's musics to come together, to learn from one another, to reflect human diversity and pluralism. What he doesn't explain is how one is to learn about or master all of these musics. or whether anyone can be held above others. One might question whether there isn't real merit in a particularity, and that it is precisely differences that make for those great works or masterpieces. Maybe I'm reading Schuller wrong in that he assumes that the great artist absorbs various materials from all musics and thus forges his own individual identity. Schuller was a creator of what is called third stream music, which was meant to bring together his two great loves, jazz and classical music. It was a failure, unfortunately, as the two genres seem to be somewhat antithetical in nature. And can all musics be equal, inasmuch as only Western music partakes of harmony and polyphony, except for jazz, of course, because it is much a Western as a Black American phenomenon, in my estimation. You might have noted that I still haven't defined music yet. Perhaps it's time to do so before my time runs out. Music in the past has done something to do with sound, its logical or natural organization into discrete frequencies, and then those frequencies being organized into various hierarchical units. A piece of music had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it takes us on a musical and emotional journey. As Roger Scruton has so eloquently informed us in his book, The Aesthetics of Music, it's a metaphor for our lives. As ethnomusicologists have informed us, much of music's early development was pretty much universal, either due to the spread of human migration from a single source or by the discovery of the nature of sound itself, as noted by Pythagoras and then others. Western music developed in many different ways from most other cultures in four astonishing ways. First was the creation, as you've seen, of a sophisticated notation that allowed the writing down of musical ideas. In most cultures, music is passed down orally from master to apprentice. Second is what Charles Murray calls in his book on human accomplishment, a meta-idea, one which extends the intellectual landscape in a manner that allows for new vistas of discovery and creativity. This is the idea, or the aforementioned idea, of polyphony, that one can have two lines moving simultaneously, but that work together. Sounds pretty easy. It ain't. This then leads to the creation of harmony, or the organized sounding of pitches at the same time. These phenomena are found almost only in Western music and allow for an unparalleled range of emotional breadth. Third, also mentioned by Charles Murray in the aforementioned text, is the prizing of the individual personality and voice, something that's been spoken about here a number of times. This has allowed for works of the deepest emotional content and for what we've called in our culture masterpieces. So quite frankly, it wouldn't matter too much if somebody else other than Euclid had formulated ideas about geometry. Those would still be universal. But Beethoven would not be Beethoven without the guts and flesh and mind that made Beethoven. And finally, this music has been affected strongly by the growth of technology, which over the last 1,000 years has brought an array of instruments that allow for the ever greater exploration of the primary musical parameters of timbre and dynamics. One must also add the modes of delivery, which included and presently include all manner of recorded technologies, from the advent of the Victrola to radio, LPs, CDs, and now, of course, streaming, which is bankrupting composers. This, along with the problematic omnipresence of music, has transformed how, when, and where we listen. I'm almost done. As we are now in a postmodern age, music as we knew and defined it may no longer pertain. The influence upon the musical world, and those, I mean those in the Academy in Brooklyn and various sub-communities of performers and composers, the old definition materials no longer apply. The change began with Varese, a French then American composer who changed the nature of music when he called it organized sound. This came at about the same time as the advent of electroacoustic music that was either made of recorded sounds or from electronic sources. The rules were also changed with John Cage's realization that music is really all about things happening in time. And thus music is just that, anything, a sound, a gesture, an action that occurs in time. Thus his famous piece, 4 minutes and 33 minutes, is simply that which occurs in that time, what occurs in that time, referenced by a pianist coming on stage and sitting at the piano for that duration. As Roger Scruton has written, however, this Duchampian joke only works once, and as it turned out to be thin gruel for the human spirit. While many composers find this music inherently boring, they nonetheless remain fascinated by the idea, and under its guise, the idea of the liberation from the actual sound of a work to the idea behind it. We had similar experience with conceptualism in the art world of the 60s and 70s, when texts replaced objects. The result in the musical world has been the flattening of aesthetic judgment, the injection of politics into music by its creators and practitioners, and a general confusion about what makes for great music. Having said this, I have no doubt that this will all sort itself out in the future, and that the great music of our time will survive, as it always has, if even only among a small band of the stalwart. Thank you.